The year was 2024. The world watched, stunned, as the United States, a nation known for its political stability and predictable electoral outcomes, found itself at the center of a global spectacle. Donald J. Trump, a man who had already defied expectations once, did it again. His campaign, marked by its unorthodox strategies and controversial statements, captivated and polarized the electorate. Ascending once more to the most powerful position on earth, Trump's second inauguration was a moment that signaled a dramatic shift in the political landscape. The world watched with bated breath, unsure of what this new era would bring. His victory sent shockwaves across the globe. International leaders, political analysts, and everyday citizens grappled with the implications of this unexpected turn of events. It was a seismic shift, the aftershocks of which continue to reverberate. Financial markets fluctuated wildly, and the geopolitical landscape began to shift in unpredictable ways. This was not merely a change in leadership, it was a tectonic plate of ideology shifting beneath the very foundations of global politics. The established norms and alliances were suddenly in question. Trump, with his brash style and unconventional approach, had promised to upend the established order. His policies and rhetoric were a stark departure from the status quo. America First was his rallying cry, a declaration that the United States under his watch would no longer prioritize global alliances or multilateral agreements. This mantra resonated deeply with his supporters. This was a stark departure from decades of American foreign policy, a radical realignment that left allies bewildered and adversaries intrigued. The implications were profound and far-reaching. The world held its breath. What would this mean for international relations, for global stability, for the intricate web of alliances that had been painstakingly built over decades? What would a second Trump presidency mean for global stability, for international cooperation? The questions were numerous and the answers elusive. For the future of diplomacy itself, the established order was being challenged in ways that were both unprecedented and unpredictable. The questions were as numerous as they were unsettling. Every corner of the globe felt the tremors of this political earthquake. One thing was clear: the world had entered uncharted territory. The old rules no longer applied, and the future was uncertain. The old rules no longer applied. The established playbook of international relations was being rewritten in real time. A new era had begun. The world watched, waited, and wondered what this new chapter in history would bring. America First wasn't just a slogan, it was the cornerstone of Trump's foreign policy doctrine during his 2024 presidency. It encapsulated a vision where the United States would no longer be the world's policeman or its economic benefactor without clear, tangible benefits in return. This doctrine was a radical departure from the multilateralism that had defined American foreign policy for decades. It represented a fundamental shift in America's approach to the world, one that was both bold and controversial. The idea was to recalibrate America's role on the global stage, focusing on national interests and sovereignty over international cooperation. This approach prioritized American interests above all else, often at the expense of long-standing alliances and partnerships. It was a move that resonated with many Americans who felt that the country had been taken advantage of by its allies and trading partners. This meant re-evaluating long-standing alliances, questioning the value of international organizations, and demanding that allies shoulder more of the financial and strategic burdens. Trump was particularly vocal about NATO, an organization he believed was outdated and unfairly reliant on American military might. Pursuing bilateral agreements that Trump believed would be more advantageous to the U.S. became a hallmark of his administration. He argued that these one-on-one deals would allow the U.S. to negotiate from a position of strength, unencumbered by the compromises inherent in multilateral agreements. One of the most significant casualties of this approach was the transatlantic alliance. The relationship between the U.S. and its European allies became increasingly strained, as Trump's rhetoric and policies often clashed with the values and expectations of NATO members. Trump's relationship with NATO was, to put it mildly, strained. He repeatedly criticized member states for not spending enough on defense, arguing that the U.S. was unfairly bearing the brunt of the financial burden. He repeatedly criticized member states for not spending enough on defense, questioning their commitment to the alliance. This criticism was not just about money, it was about the very relevance of NATO in the 21st century. Trump questioned the organization's relevance in the 21st century, suggesting that it was a relic of the Cold War that needed to be reformed or even dismantled. His stance created uncertainty and anxiety among NATO members. He even threatened to withdraw the U.S. entirely, a move that would have had profound implications for global security. This threat sent shockwaves through Europe, where NATO had been a cornerstone of security for decades. European leaders were left scrambling to reassure their citizens and each other that the alliance would endure, even as they grappled with the possibility of a future without American leadership. Trump's America First agenda also extended to trade. He believed that previous trade deals had disadvantaged American workers and industries, and he set out to renegotiate or abandon them. He imposed tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, Canada, and the European Union, sparking trade wars that disrupted global supply chains and damaged economies around the world. These tariffs were intended to protect American industries from what Trump saw as unfair competition. The tariffs sparked trade wars that disrupted global supply chains and damaged economies around the world. Factories shut down and empty store shelves became a common sight as the ripple effects of these policies were felt far and wide. His supporters argued that these measures were necessary to protect American jobs and industries from unfair competition. They believed that a tougher stance on trade would ultimately benefit the American economy by bringing jobs back to the U.S. Critics, however, countered that they were counterproductive, harming American consumers and businesses in the process. They pointed to higher prices for goods and retaliatory tariffs that hurt American exporters. The America First approach, while appealing to some segments of the American public, left the nation deeply divided. Supporters saw it as a necessary correction to decades of misguided policies, while critics viewed it as a dangerous retreat from global leadership. This approach left many around the world wondering if the U.S. was turning its back on its traditional role as a global leader. International allies and adversaries alike were forced to reconsider their strategies in a world where American leadership was no longer a given. The long-term consequences of this shift remain to be seen. While some argue that it has made America stronger and more self-reliant, others believe it has weakened the country's global standing and influence. There is no doubt that it has fundamentally altered the landscape of international relations. The world is watching closely to see how this new era of American foreign policy will unfold and what it will mean for the future of global cooperation and stability. Trump, the self-proclaimed master negotiator, approached trade with the same bravado he brought to the boardroom. His approach was characterized by a mix of boldness and unpredictability, traits that he believed gave him an edge in negotiations. He often touted his ability to strike deals that others couldn't, and this confidence was evident in his trade policies. His weapon of choice? Tariffs. These tariffs were not just economic tools, but also political statements. They were meant to signal to both domestic and international audiences that the United States would no longer tolerate what he perceived as unfair trade practices. These were not mere negotiating tactics, they were blunt instruments wielded with the intention of bending trading partners to his will. Trump believed that by imposing tariffs, he could force other countries to come to the negotiating table and agree to terms more favorable to the United States. China, with its massive trade surplus with the U.S., became the primary target. The trade imbalance was a frequent talking point for Trump, who argued that China had been taking advantage of the U.S. for years. He aimed to rectify this by imposing tariffs on a wide range of Chinese goods. The ensuing trade war was a tit-for-tat exchange of tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods. Each side responded to the other's tariffs with their own, leading to a cycle of retaliation that affected numerous industries and sectors. Steel, aluminum, soybeans, electronics, all became pawns in this high-stakes game of economic chess. Industries that were once thriving found themselves caught in the crossfire, with tariffs impacting their supply chains and bottom lines. The impact was felt globally. Supply chains were disrupted. Companies that relied on international trade faced delays and increased costs, which were often passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Businesses on both sides of the Pacific suffered. Consumers faced higher prices. Small businesses in particular struggled to absorb the increased costs, leading to financial strain and, in some cases, closures. While Trump argued that the tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs and intellectual property, critics argued that they were ultimately self-defeating. They pointed out that the tariffs hurt American consumers and businesses just as much, if not more, than their intended targets. The trade war, they argued, hurt American businesses and consumers just as much as their Chinese counterparts. Farmers, manufacturers, and retailers all felt the pinch, with some sectors experiencing significant downturns. Moreover, it did little to address the underlying issues in the U.S.-China trade relationship, such as forced technology transfer and intellectual property theft. These complex issues required more nuanced solutions than tariffs alone could provide. The trade war with China was a defining feature of Trump's presidency. It was a bold move that garnered both praise and criticism, reflecting the divisive nature of his leadership style. It was a gamble, a high-stakes bet that ultimately yielded mixed results. While some industries saw benefits, others were left reeling from the economic fallout. While some American companies benefited from the tariffs, many others suffered. The uneven impact of the trade war highlighted the complexities of global trade and the challenges of implementing broad economic policies. The long-term impact on the global economy remains to be seen, but there is no doubt that Trump's trade policies left an indelible mark on the world stage. The trade war with China will be remembered as a significant chapter in the ongoing story of international trade relations.